This technology is coming. It will be here sooner than you think. And I feel a real responsibility to the industry to build something that is going to revolutionise and make surveying better.
That's James Brook, CEO and founder of Novello. He sees the introduction of AI as a turning point for residential surveyors.
This is about freeing up the surveyors, so the reports will be a lot quicker because it will use image recognition and voice notes.
He believes AI has the potential to give surveyors time back so they can provide their clients with a more personalised experience.
If I was a surveyor, I'd be thinking, what can I do to make myself far better and irreplaceable?
He and I discuss how AI has the potential to completely reshape the residential surveying process, how to adopt AI without compromising on quality, and ultimately the skills that are going to be integral to ensure that surveyors are irreplaceable in the future. I'm Louis Blaxill, and this is The Surveying Shift.
Welcome to The Surveying Shift. I'm Louis Blaxill, CEO of Go Reports, where we've been helping surveyors embrace digital transformation across the industry. Each episode, we give you the clarity and confidence to adopt the right digital tools, simplify compliance, and stay competitive in a changing industry without sacrificing profitability. Let's jump into today's episode. So James, welcome to the podcast and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. We founded back in 2019. It was just myself and my co-founder, Jack Pye, from a garden shed at the time. So that was just really at the cusp of, pre-COVID, that kind of era. And we always had, a clear vision that we wanted to grow something big. It's gone from strength to strength. So we really focus on quality, detailed premium service, but really above all that, the systemization of the business. So we were beyond our years. We were using, quite a complex CRM. We've been using Go Reports since 2017 at our old firm. So we had all these systems and processes and a kind of a real regimented way of working, focus around kind of quality and consistency that we brought with us, even when it was just the two of us. So we quickly grew, I think, probably in the first year to a team of 4 of us. And then we've kind of grown over the years. And I think Novello chartered surveyors there are about 30, a team of 30 there now. We acquired Castle Surveyors. That was last year. So they were more commercial secured lending, but still a lot of home surveys. And then this year was the big one. Back in April, we acquired Goldcrest Chartered Surveyors. So that has effectively trebled us overnight. It's taken us to what we think probably second or third largest deliverer of home surveys in terms of revenue and numbers in the UK, which is for us kind of, a real how did we get here kind of moment when we're up against really Countrywide and eServe are the only ones topping us in terms of volume. So I think we've got a real opportunity now to do something a little bit different, to deliver something from an independent, quality-driven mindset that isn't just, another corporate or mainly mortgage valuations where surveys is a small part of their business. So, yeah, we've got an exciting journey ahead of us, but it's been a bit of a wild one to get here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's astronomical growth. And I mean, this is one of the reasons we wanted to get you on the podcast, actually, was it was interesting the first time we spoke about this. Novello's reputation of quality precedes itself. And it was interesting to hear you kind of really banging the drum for the use of AI and how it can be used to enhance quality and customer experience, because I think there is a perception, we'll come on to it in a minute, of the risk that AI does diminish the quality of that a customer gets. But it's I think the work and the reputation that you guys have speaks for itself.
I mean, I think it's a real risk in our industry is the driving down of quality. And it was part of our reason for acquiring Goldcrest. And, I'll be brazen about it. I know Goldcrest have probably up there as one of the leaders in terms of that volume, low fee model. That has certainly driven commoditization of our industry. And it's nothing new, but we're terrible as an industry at charging a good fee for a decent service, and we've commoditized ourselves. So we acquired Goldcrest because we thought, this can be done differently on a national scale. It's almost easy for us in our ivory tower of London, where our average fee at the moment is just over 1,500. To say, well, we could deliver quality elsewhere. It's hard to deliver quality when the market and the fees don't reflect that, and that's an uphill battle with Goldcrest that we've already had 4 months. We've upped their fees 20%, and that's not just about kind of increasing money. It's meant we've been able to reduce the number of surveys that we're doing across the board, focus more on quality. All our surveyors now have drones. I think we were one of the first firms back in the day with Novello to have drones, and that to me is, you know, a real sign of kind of quality and innovation. And it was one of the first things. We bought nearly 40 drones, I think, for Goldcrest, and hired a big cricket pitch to get everyone kind of testing and flying them. So we've done a lot in a short space of time with them. But I think the industry, you know, the wider industry has got a lot of work to do around that, because we're battling against those fees every single day.
It's not the main topic of the podcast today, but it's an interesting one. I'd love to get your take on the cultural shift and the work that you have to put in to go from someone that was more focused on volume and hitting large numbers of surveys to more aligned with the Novello Group way of doing surveying. What work have you done to make sure that happens?
It's quite simple, really. Surveying, you've got to get the work, and then you've got to be able to deliver it. And that was when we stood up in front of the Goldcrest team, who, by the way, were in for a massive shock. They came down to Derby for a training day, and, you know, no one knew it. This was very under the wraps, as often these deals are, especially in the situations there that we bought them out. And we announced our ownership to them, to everyone at once in a bar, and then had a full day the next day of training. And we had to do a full shift. So they had their own tech. We moved them all onto Go Report the next day. We had all our own reports, a completely different approach to it. They were very risk averse just because of the number of claims they had. So everything was, you know, further recommendations, CI free. So we had this real cultural change as well. But I stood in front of them and said, the main reason you're doing volume is not because anyone's greedy in this situation. The company's losing money. The main reason is because your fees are too low. So if your fees are low, you have to do more work. And the main reason your fees are low is because where they come from. And I think as an industry, we're so reliant on comparison sites, digital marketing. Yeah. So our big focus is kind of relationship, referrals, business development. And that's a slow burn, but we've done it in Novello. We've you know, taken them to, you know, a really high fee, quality focused business, and we're not going to repeat that same extent because it's London, but we know we can take Goldcrest on that similar journey. It all comes down to where that work's coming from in the first place.
Actually, we did a podcast on lead generation and driving pipeline and converting it, the one before this, which is a shame we didn't have you on that one as well, because there's some interesting insight share there. But yeah, one of the core themes clearly that's come out from your journey is the use of technology and your willingness to adopt it, right? Perhaps when other people are on the fence. And I suppose that leads nicely onto our topic of, you know, why is AI so widely talked about at the moment, and at a very, very high level, almost as a soundbite. What impact do you think it will have on the residential surveying space? Yeah,
I think the answer is huge, and I do think a lot of people underestimate that impact. I've put quite a bit of content out around AI and what we're working on, and it's amazing the negative reception that gets there. There's a post that I did recently, and it had such a backlash. I had the guy who trained me 10 years ago, basically saying, I trained you 10 years ago and now you're going to give away all this for free with AI. And thanks for that. I had someone, go AI, go broke. Another guy saying those that lead the industry, lead technology are the ones that come off worse. And lots of people just saying, oh, great, this is going to ruin the industry. Like, it was a real negative reaction. Most of it was centered around kind of devaluing what we do. And I think for me, you can either bury your head in the sand and be someone who's, adamant that this isn't going to impact or it's going to ruin the industry, or you can embrace it and you can effectively create it to be what you want. And I feel like we're in a very lucky and privileged position where we're big enough to have the resources to build something like this. We've got a full-time head of AI at Novello, so we've got the resources to be able to build this and sculpt something into exactly how we want it. But we've also got, we're not too big. We've not got the corporate mentality, and we've got that kind of entrepreneurial nous and agility where we're close enough to the fire that we, as the owners of the business and the leaders of the business, understand what surveying is and have a real clear vision. So I think for us, we've got that really unique opportunity to deliver AI. And I don't think there's many firms in that category. But I think ultimately AI is going to have a huge impact, and the technology is increasing at a ridiculous rate. I saw some study about its ability to answer PhD questions compared to 6 months ago. So I don't think it's an underestimation to say we're at one of those rare moments in history where that technology is taking us. Almost comparisons to other revolutions don't really apply with this. We're in such uncharted territory. So yeah, we're at a real unique turning point, and I even find my own thinking sometimes kind of really limited by what's possible at the moment.
There was an interesting study which Microsoft released, I think, which was last year or kind of 18 months ago. There was the kind of revolution of people using AI in secrecy, right? There were people using AI surreptitiously when their boss said, "Oh, could you do this?" And people would then go and do it on AI and pretend like they didn't do it on AI. And the most recent report that they've done, I think it's the most recent report they've done, that's completely switched, right? So now managers are saying, "Well, how are you using AI to make yourself more efficient? How are you using AI to augment your work?" And I think potentially we're experiencing that in the surveying world, where people are becoming more cognizant of it. And I was going to ask you, what was it that you think inspires or predominantly inspired that backlash on LinkedIn? Is it that people are just discovering it for the first time, they're going on that kind of learning curve themselves, or is it rooted in something else?
It's fair, because ultimately, and this isn't a new thing, the fear is about losing jobs and your skill set essentially becoming irrelevant. We've seen that Facebook have fired loads of their mid-tier developers, and so many kind of tasks that are slightly more mundane can now be massively automated, and it will change. For in our business, admin has been reduced massively, but we're shifting that and moving those people who would normally do those roles into more relationship business development roles. So I think it drives a fear around job losses and their skill set not being as relevant. And I don't think a lot of those fears are unfounded, unfortunately, but there are ways to kind of there are ways that where you should be shifting to make yourself not replaceable in the future.
I suppose a good note to kick us off with, if we can try and make this as tangible as possible for people listening. What is it at Novello that you're pointing AI at? So rather than us giving a nebulous description of it, let's talk about, where do you think it's going to materially impact the way that surveyors at Novello do their job in the near future? I
think like the technology that's there with photo recognition already, most surveyors probably by now have taken a photo on ChatGPT and asked it to give defect of, and been probably pretty impressed or scared at the output. The technology is there and it's only getting better. How we're building. So we're building our own AI app and interactive portal for our clients to use. So there's two parts to me. That there's the surveyor data kind of gathering and report writing, which is a very kind of onerous task at the moment, and probably takes up far more of the surveying journey than it needs to do. And it's not the important. The PDF report is not the most important part of it.
It's an interesting one, because I think the industry has been centered around the PDF report for a long time. Do you think that will be a difficult mindset for people to adopt, right? Because the PDF to a degree is still important as a reference document, as an example of the work you've done, and anything that needs to be referred back to is there. But I know you guys go beyond that and offer more of a customer experience. But do you think that'll be a difficult shift for people to embrace?
Not really, if the alternative's, far superior. And I think it's that kind of, we'll still have an output for a PDF, because it might be needed for legal documentation and things like that. But I think it's what's it based on? It's based on typewriters, printing reports. I can't remember the last time we printed the report. The fact that we're still sending PDFs out is bonkers in my mind, and they probably should have died a death 5 years ago. But so we'll have an interactive portal, and this is the beauty of AI, is its ability to present data in a way that would be so time consuming for us to do. So little things like summaries of each section,
Yeah.
We live in a TikTok society where people don't want to consume, pages and pages of data. And some people will, but the amount of clients I personally have spoken to who you just know they haven't read the report from the questions that they're asking, being able to provide kind of too long did not read summaries at the start. Infographics is a big one. So we've built a lot of kind of, pie chart wheels of, long-term, short-term, CR3, CR2 defects in there. So that ability, maintenance planning. So if you were from your survey to write a maintenance plan of almost like on a Gantt chart of the things that need to be done now in the first 6 months, the next year, the next 2 years, that would be probably a half hour project in itself to write that. AI can pull that data from your survey and present that. So actually it's going to be a far better product for the client if they, if this data can be presented in a far readable way. And then things like, I could go on, but, having an AI chat box. So the AI chat box who can kind of pull bits of data from that and give you answers. So I think that's a big part of it. We're also pulling in kind of data in terms of flood maps, all that data planning, presenting it live within that portal. So the actual end product versus a PDF, do I think there'll be kind of pushback on that? No, because it won't be comparable in any way to what you get. You'll be basically getting a live website about your property. So I just don't think that, and I think the product for us will sell itself.
I can completely see the vision, and that is an exciting one, right? As you say, it feels like a really modern, engaging way of understanding your property, and particularly that interaction that the customer can interrogate your data using an AI chatbot is an interesting one, not least because they'll get bored. I suppose they can have effectively that conversation without necessarily needing too much input from a surveyor, but also you'll then get that insight into what it is that they're asking, right? So that you can provide a better service next time if you can then spot patterns and I suppose do your own analysis on 9 times out of 10 people are asking X, Y, Z.
Yeah. This isn't about replacing surveyor expertise. It's actually about the opposite. But I know I was using a new bit of software the other day, and I ended up using their AI chat function because they were offline, and it was great. And not all experiences are, but actually I found myself asking it questions that I never would bother going on to support to ask. Every little bit that I was trying to set up on this website, I was asking it, and I envisage the same thing. Whereas our surveyors will be more accessible than they were before, but actually you might have some little niggling questions. What's plaster? What's render? How serious is this? Just little questions that you wouldn't raise with a surveyor, maybe even out of embarrassment, because it just, it seems so basic. What's the flashing? So all this kind of little questions or context or stuff like that you might want instantly and wouldn't necessarily want to go to a human, it will have that. But ultimately for us, this is about freeing up the surveyors. So we're hoping the reports will be a lot quicker because it will use image recognition and voice notes to then create the survey reports from that, all built around. So, you've got the ability of what ChatGPT does as a large language model. I think we're using a mix of 7 different large language models, but then on top of that, we've got our own, what you call like a RAG database, which is essentially a huge library of lots of data, lots of reports, surveys, photographs, standard phrases, basically a huge library, building regulations, RICS standards, everything in there. And I think we've got over 100,000 photos in there that will kind of form the database from that. And then obviously as more and more gets loaded into it and it gets trained, it just becomes more accurate. So, you can see the ability there with ChatGPT already, but our AI developer thinks it will get to a stage where you can walk around and video. And, you probably don't need that much input from the surveyors. And that's the scary bit. But for us, we're going to use that as an opportunity to double down on the relationship side. So we want to focus on, what if after every survey we met the client there and spent an hour with them or half an hour walking around? What if we met with every agent or solicitor involved in the transaction, or called them, or had way more time to offer consultations with the client. So rather than the PDF being probably 90% of the service, which is what it is at the moment, you get a report and you might have a phone call. We want to, almost flip that on the head and make it a way more consultative approach.
That's an interesting one. Paint the picture for me then. What and perhaps splitting between being in the shoes of the customer and being in the shoes of the surveyor. Just an end-to-end kind of, right, customer has signed on the dotted line for a job with you. What does that look like? Maybe put it kind of a couple of years down the line when everything's working, all singing, all dancing. What's the vision that you have for the journey?
I think everything that is in that process that is not that AI can replace probably will be replaced, and everything that requires human communication we will double down on. So it's not necessarily end to end gonna save us any more time, but there'll just be far more human experience in there. So we're already kind of automating terms, diary booking, everything like that, CRM system. And then instead of having a very admin heavy admin team, it's going to be more focused on the business development side and the team there who are reaching out to the estate agents, speaking to the solicitors, etc. So our whole kind of admin pipeline and sales pipeline at the start is already more focused on speaking. So so that's kind of the example there. We'd probably have the surveyor calling, having a consultation maybe beforehand if it's needed, but certainly afterwards, the opportunity to meet the surveyor on site, to have a Teams call once you've read the report, have more interactive chat functions there. So just essentially increasing that human contact where it's wanted. Some people have no interest in that, but essentially offering far more availability of expertise, because I do think we're going to lead to a world where, firstly, AI starts to be more appreciated and desired. I've already seen it on kind of, booking.com and those kind of websites. If they have some kind of AI tool on there, that to me is already a plus, because it can, give me far better results. We've already got clients who find us through ChatGPT rather than Google. It's quite we had a £50 million one the other week. So that kind of perception of AI will change, but at the same time, I think there'll be more of a desire for human interaction. So I saw someone the other day kind of raising the question: do we think that people will start offering human only, no non-AI surveys? And there might be a niche for that, because people will be demanded.
There will always be some who don't.
Yeah, and I think that it will become far more appreciated. I don't know if you've ever used Octopus Energy. I'm a big fan of theirs, and it's just the ability to call their call center and someone picks up within 30 seconds and talks you through your problem. I can email them, and it's not like dealing with British Gas where you're to some overseas call center, and you just can't get the answer. That you're dealing with local expert humans who take ownership for it, and I think they're a prime example where they focus on that human service element whilst at the same time kind of creating efficiencies and savings elsewhere.
They're able to do that because their systems are so good and because the process behind the scenes is so slick.
And that's the same for, if it, instead of taking 4 hours to do a building survey inspection, if it takes an hour or 2 hours to do a survey inspection, which people will probably, say that's not possible, but you're thinking with a mindset that you don't know the technology, and I don't even know the technology yet. So you can't say that's not possible. And I can tell you it will be possible. But if you can save that, what will happen is it'll probably split in two. You'll have corporates who just use it, and some other firms who just use it as a volume driving tool. And I'm not saying we won't increase volume, because if it does have those savings, we can do both, but not to their extent. And then you'll have other firms who use that opportunity, like us, to double down on that human kind of interaction and that excellent service and that approach. And that's the avenue we're going to go. So I think it will require more surveying expertise, because I think that's what people will want. They'll want to speak to, because AI can't give you, that logical, soft skills, that reassurance that you need, that only a human can provide. And that's what our role will become. I think we'll end up like almost like buying agents for some clients.
A very quick break from the episode. Surveying is changing fast.
and firms that are still resisting technology are falling behind. At Go Report, we help you work smarter, pioneering new technology through our platform that saves you time, impresses your clients, and keeps you ahead of the competition. If you want faster inspections and sharper reporting, scan the QR code or see the link in the show notes. Now back to the conversation.
It's an interesting one. So we're developing a number of AI features at Go Report, and whilst we're similarly to you very impressed with the technology and confident in its outputs, what we want to do is take our customers on a kind of journey, as it were. So certainly to start with, it's suggestions, it's QA, it's challenge of perhaps what's in the report. How are you balancing that, I suppose, with your development from going from not using it or using it in certain instances, I'm sure, to, that vision you painted is a really exciting one, but there's quite a jump to get there. I suppose you can do it through testing and various other things, but how do you plan on kind of, I suppose, getting from where we are today to that vision you painted?
I mean, we're hoping in the next month to have the app in our in-house app for beta testing. So it's going to need a lot of training, and it literally is training the AI, but also training the surveyors to use it. We'll then widen it out. I'm a big perfectionist, so it will have to work. The detail will be there. I've seen it with Goldcrest. When we acquired them, they had built their own technology, and it became a real black hole and was one of their biggest factors in kind of decline. And it, it wasn't great technology in the end. We switched them to Go Report, and they found it a hell of a lot easier. So I'm aware that you can go down a bit of a black hole with these kind of things. So it'll have to be well, and then we'll roll it out. But we really, I think, because we're so systemized and we've got such a kind of specific way of working at Novello and Goldcrest now, it fits quite nicely into our systemized approach to doing those surveys. One
of the challenges inevitably that's leveled, and I do genuinely believe it is a fair challenge for us to consider, particularly with younger generations coming into the profession, is over-reliance and I suppose de-skilling when it comes to AI. You mentioned the importance, and it's absolutely critical and will continue to be so, of the kind of skilled surveyor who's able to lead people on a journey and explain what they should be thinking about when it comes to their property. But I suppose that's all very well and good when you've got really good surveyors, right? But those people who typically would have done those jobs that perhaps are being automated now, right? Writing up the 100th report and going, now I really understand the specific issues that's come up numerous times and where it might occur. Does that concern you? Does that worry you?
No, I think it's a tool for actually improving standards. So little things like we have the ability to flag something. So if someone says there are high ground levels, it will give them a prompt when they're on the floor to check for dampness and rot. Mm-hmm. So it will be prompting them, it will be training them, versus what most surveyors do, to be honest, even after doing, courses. And I did a master's degree. Even when you're on site, the main thing I learned from was shadowing, and that won't change. But if I'm honest, the standard phrases, I at the time was using a survey text pad, and you would go down and that was almost your checklist. So we've got checklists in there, we've got prompts, it will train you. The only time that skill set will be lost is if you are unthinking, you're basically an unthinking data entry, and that could happen. It's hard to say, it depends how much input you are doing yourself, but that could happen if it wasn't for the fact that we'll always foresee a need that you have to sit down, and your role is actually advising the client. You need to be an expert, so you need to be a subject expert. So you can't just kind of go around there on autopilot. So I think I think there'll be eventually completely AI surveys, probably, where people just go around and take photographs. That de-skills it. But actually, if you're using it as an efficiency tool and an accuracy tool to then supplement you as that professional advisor, giving that human to human expert advice, I think that will enhance your ability, if anything.
One thing we've been thinking about at Go Report, and indeed we're going to release in the next month or two, is this, what we're calling Go Pilot or knowledge base as well, which is basically all of the standards and regulations that would be applicable to a specific surveyor, and making them more accessible. Because one of the jobs, as you said, having been through a master's and a degree, to retain all that knowledge to an accurate degree and know exactly where it is incredibly challenging. But being able to then interrogate a massive database that you can pull out specific questions. All you then need to know is, I suppose you need to have the fundamental understanding of it exists. I can't remember exactly, but I know the right questions to ask in order to surface the right data for my customers. So there are exciting opportunities in terms of upskilling as well, I think.
Yeah, it's things, being able to on site take a photograph and say, is that balustrade the right height? Because most surveyors do not have an in-depth knowledge of building regulations. That's not our role. Changes too often. It's too complex. Our role is mainly to spot and flag things. And if we do need to do further research or we need to look it up when we get home, cladding's a prime example. I could not tell you what the current, EWS1 categories and that are about. But actually, if I see it's their problem, I can go home and research it. But this puts it at your fingertips. So the ability to do that, is mega.
There's an interesting piece which I don't think will be so relevant for Novello, but certainly it's quite a challenge in the market more broadly, particularly when you're using public large language models, is that kind of data governance and data privacy, and people just loading things into ChatGPT. And I suppose your solution to that is to build your own. And I imagine it's all private and being trained on your own data. But that is also, I suppose, a challenge that people raise when it comes to thinking about AI and
yeah, people do need to be very careful about that. You're also giving away like your most valuable asset in this day and age, which is your data. You're giving that away. Ours is kept very locally, very secure. It was kind of one of the first things we kind of spoke about in terms of protecting that anonymized data, all those kind of things. But above that is the value of that data, those photographs, those notes, that ongoing training that you can put into there. I think probably Go Report probably have a very valuable data set. We've got a very valuable data set. Those data sets aren't there because when our AI guy was starting early on, he said this is probably available as a data set already, and he came back and said no, it's not. So that kind of information isn't out there at the moment, but it probably will soon be if people continue to use ChatGPT. And the client protection as well. You cannot be putting sensitive stuff into ChatGPT.
Absolutely. And I think the other foible or downside to those public models as well, and I imagine you would have built this into your infrastructure, and certainly something we're finding as we're developing AI features, is the ability for it to hallucinate, right? That's the real risk, the real slip up. Yeah. We've found you've really got to lock down those settings, as it were, to make sure it doesn't stray beyond, because unfortunately things like ChatGPT, if there is a gap, it will fill it with something, irrespective of whether it's true or not. So I'd be interested to get your take on how you've managed that from your side when you're developing that.
It's probably more a technical answer than I know the answer to. But I imagine it comes down to that RAG library that we've effectively got, which is under Guardrails. I couldn't tell you what a guardrail is, but that's a phrase I hear used a lot by our developer when he's kind of
used it very well there. Yeah.
So I know we've got very strict guardrails around that. I know we've got a fantastic library on top of 7 large language models already that kind of have trained it to do that. But I think ultimately, and this is my non-technical view on this, it comes down to the fact that it's still being signed off by an RICS qualified surveyor. So our surveys, they will still need to be manually edited and gone through. And that's not something I would ever want to change, even if it was possible, because I think you've got to have that quality assurance, and then you've got to be able to be confident about what you put in front of the client is accurate. We get it sometimes with standard phrases where, a little silly error and you've overlooked that, that standard phrase that you should have deleted because it doesn't apply. Just silly things. You spoke about the garage and there wasn't one. I've seen reports like that are just completely not applicable. And it's just because someone's overlooked it, a little thing. Hallucination is a big issue with these AIs. I think that will get better, but ultimately you as the surveyor have got to be confident when you're checking through.
I think, and again, the way that we're designing our model, it's at a fundamental level, training it to go, right, if you don't know, you just say, right, that's I think as these models develop, it's far better if you have a default setting of, if you're not sure, one, articulate that you're not sure and perhaps give a suggestion, or just say, look, I can't answer that specific question. It's far better than completely hallucinating something in that instance.
Yeah, and I think that's what those guardrails are about.
You mentioned also there, checking reports. Something that we're looking at and developing is a kind of report health check. And I don't know whether that's something, I suppose if you're fundamentally building your reports from ground up with AI that might not necessarily be so applicable, but the kind of feature that we're developing is based actually on the fact of consumer behavior more than anything. Of, the chances are a young couple or anyone who's AI cognizant, I suppose, may well take your report and stick it into ChatGPT and go, what does this mean? Are there any errors with it? Check for any inconsistencies. The importance of doing that now before you send it to a customer, almost seeing the report through their lens is becoming ever more important.
And we have that built in with kind of we have an overall kind of check on it as well, like alerts for things that might not be accurate, but also the prompts as we're going around. But I think that's a good point around the kind of everyone suddenly becomes an expert on. We've noticed an uptick when, unfortunately I think you do over 10,000 surveys, over £8 million worth of surveys a year at the moment. So you naturally get, a reasonable amount of claims from that and complaints. And we've noticed an uptick in that. From people, accurately referencing home survey standards, and sometimes it's completely hallucinated, to touch on the
point before. To combine the two.
Yeah, it's clear that they've gone through, ChatGPT and have come back to that. And we've had someone was telling me the other day they had a call with a client, and he said exactly that. He's run the report, he's got the summary from the report. I've started doing it, to be honest. If I've got a contract through or something like that, I'll run it. I'll anonymize it first, but I'll run it through ChatGPT and just say, look, what are the big ticket items here? Is there anything out of the norm that I need to know about? So yeah, I think we've got to be top of our game, and we've got to be confident in the stuff that we're putting in there going forward, because you will get caught out by AI experts.
Yeah, becoming ever more prevalent across both residential and commercial surveying. From our perspective, it gives people the ability to interrogate things in a way that they never would have done before. And that's a really interesting one. And this may be something you're keeping under your hat. You referenced the importance of data. I don't know whether you're taking it beyond just delivering the individual reports, and you're starting to extract value from the entirety of the surveys you've done to add additional insight around specific areas. I know you focus predominantly on London. Is that something you've considered, kind of, because AI obviously has an enormous amount of power in terms of interrogating large data sets and drawing conclusions that you can then pass on to customers?
It's kind of things we've had initial conversations about. So claims is a big one, kind of spotting patterns, that kind of stuff. And then, driving for, even in the sales process, kind of objection handling and things like that. Be completely honest with you, it's such a mammoth task that we've got already building it, that I'm kind of just focused on
phase 2, perhaps.
Yeah. I can't even tell you right now what the product is. And by that, I mean, I don't know where a level 2 or a level 3 or even a level 1, but I don't know where that falls in this model, because actually if all you're doing is, using notes, photographs, prompts to write which is in its simplest form how we're seeing surveyors use it at the moment. I saw someone on LinkedIn this morning. I don't know if you're aware of this. They built a plugin.
I saw. Yeah.
And like that, for me, if you're just saying, slipping tiles to main roof or something shorthand, what is the difference there between it being level 2 or level 3? Because the large language model will write that text accordingly. All it needs is those initial prompts. And the difference, at the moment between a level 2 and a level 3 is essentially the level of detail, the amount of advice, the timescales, that kind of thing. And there's not a huge difference. So is there a room for a lesser report? And I think probably, but it's a bit like Tesla, how they restrict some of the features on them, even though it's built the same and it's got the capability, they just turn off some of those restrictions. So it might, from a kind of marketing and sales perspective, because I know we have clients come to us, and even if it was the same price for a level 2 as it was for a level 3, they're adamant they only want the level 2 because they they don't want to pay for that. Or if you charge them the same fee, they feel like they're overpaying. We currently have free products because that's the marketing, the rule of free. We give people a choice, and we anchor most people towards that main middle product. But if we were to do this with AI, we would be purposely dumbing down some of the content and shortening the report.
Almost more work for you at that point, right? To go, we're going to develop something that isn't quite as good, which is an odd concept.
Because it's more development. It's the surveyors then have to be aware of the difference. So, I mean, I've always been an advocate of you just do one survey and it's a detailed survey, and but that's not necessarily what the customer want. They're wired through marketing to like to pick between a product and it's the middle tier. So I don't even know beyond that kind of, we just getting this out and having it as good as possible, and then I will say also in terms of some of the abilities, and it's exciting to kind of look at the next stage of what you can do with that data. And this is what I mean by it's kind of unprecedented.
So, I mean, obviously you painted a really exciting vision there, and you clearly earned the right to play in that space in the growth journey you've been on. I suppose a question for those who are perhaps earlier in their journey or perhaps don't have the capital at their disposal to develop their own solution, what would you be doing if you were perhaps at the start of your journey again at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty with AI and where it is now is it's so much more accessible than it's been ever before. And you're seeing that with, people like Matt, who I touched upon earlier, who's built his kind of own plugin. So I think if I had that mindset and that tech approach, I probably would be developing something, even if it was just essentially a plugin of ChatGPT to rephrase stuff. Or even, we did this sometime last year, trained our own ChatGPT model. That's something you can do. You can set rules. You can upload your own kind of mini library on ChatGPT. Very simple to do. Probably half an hour. You can have it where it's there to phrase stuff. So we have it where it will phrase and rephrase text in our kind of terminology. Maybe I would be doing that. To be honest, the biggest factor right now is I'd be looking to my SaaS provider like yourselves to basically be like, you guys need to be pulling this out, out of your back pocket and what's, and I probably would be hammering you guys to know what was coming down the line next. So and maybe more a question for what are you guys doing? No,
that's very fair. And we're getting that, and we are developing something. Actually, as I said, we're kind of we are releasing or launching a prototype at Sava, and then we're probably a month away from launching something to our wider customer base. So it is coming from our side. We're taking the first steps to augment the surveying process, right? We're focusing on making sure that every step along the way is a conscious decision by a surveyor to use AI in line with the RICS standards. It's you've got the option to not use it, but then you can use it if you think it will augment you. So you mentioned ChatGPT, so it's bringing that in-house basically and making sure that all hallucinations are removed and it's trained on data in the Go Report system, so you're getting the best possible outcomes that you can there. So from our perspective, that rephrasing functionality will be built in. I've mentioned it before also. What
as part of that, because you've obviously got a far bigger database than you've got probably. Do you know how many residential surveys go through Go Report a year roughly?
It's in excess of tens of thousands. It's almost towards the next zero.
So that amount of data on residential surveys in the UK is probably nowhere else. So I think you've got, I think when we spoke previously, I said, your biggest threat, but also your biggest opportunity is AI, and you've got that huge database, far bigger than we will ever have. Like, are you going to use that as part of this to create something?
Yeah, absolutely. We see that as a differentiator going forward, and that's been built into the first iteration, but will only be enhanced as we develop it and iterate it over time, certainly. So yeah, things like rephrasing, things like health checks of reports at the end to get a summary and an overview of what perhaps could be changed. As I said before, the knowledge base and being able to interrogate regulation standards, so you don't have to then go, find something that you don't know necessarily exists. And then finally, and I suppose this is where it really starts to play into it, we're launching also an automated caption feature. Okay. So taking a picture and it will automatically caption that data for you. And that's, again, where the extensive data library that we have can start to inform that.
As a current consumer of Go Report as well, that's what I would be crying out for. If we weren't developing our own thing, I was, 2 years ago, SME with, without the resources, because it is a fine line between having those, wasting money unnecessarily, when actually it's far better to take something off the shelf that someone spent hundreds and thousands and millions of pounds on developing themselves versus building something bespoke to your exact way of working. And I think that's reflective of the industry. I don't think surveying's changed greatly in probably 50 years, maybe even longer. since typewriters and photographs were probably the biggest revelation and revolution. But I think actually there's going to be such a rate of change now with the approach and how things are done in terms of how information is presented. And I think that's, I've seen it with Go Report. I don't think I've seen, as an end user, a huge amount of change since 2017. But I imagine probably over the next, year, 2 years, I'll see way more change in that period than I have in almost the last 10 years.
No, I think it represents a real tipping point and almost entirely technology driven. And AI being at the forefront of that, there's a real opportunity for us to take that next step, I think. And one thing I should say is we have had customers reach out, and we do really appreciate it. So if anyone is listening and thinking, I'd love AI to help support, or I think there's a real opportunity here, that's one of the other fantastic. We collect ideas from everyone and then roll them out to everyone, right? So all it takes is for one or two people to have a really smart idea and really understand how I could augment them, and then we can roll that out to many, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting. I think just to come back to your first point as well, what else would I be doing in terms of like approaching that? I think it would be, yes, looking for the likes of yourselves to be providing that solution to me, and maybe looking what else is there, but actually focusing on that human element that we've spoke about. So our big thing is, automating the mundane but humanizing the exceptional, and really focusing on what needs to be done there. I think it was Simon Sinek was speaking about a firm he was consulting who brought in all AI call handling, all AI call handlers, and have now taken them out because customers just hate them. And actually what they're focusing their training now is on the soft skills and the negotiation, all that kind of stuff. So I think if I was a surveyor, whether I was at a corporate or working for myself or an SME, I'd be thinking, what can I do to make myself far better and irreplaceable? And I tell you what that isn't. It's not technical knowledge. Yes, it's going to be really important to have technical knowledge, but less so. And that's going to get diminished with the ability of AI. What it won't replace is your network, your relationships, your soft skills. These are all the things that are non-replaceable. And I think for me, I've never had a surveyor in a one-to-one, when we speak about progression, say anything other than go on courses or become a training person. Everyone, it seems to me, surveyors are so focused on the technical, and very few are focused on relationships. And I don't see that in other industries. Lawyers, they all do lots of networking, build them.
Realise the value in that.
Yeah, I think surveyors are used to opening an iPad and having their jobs there. If I was a young surveyor or an older surveyor right now, I'd be going out and networking and building those human to human relationships, so that when this revolution comes in, I've got something far more valuable that can't be replaced.
That is completely irreplaceable. I mean, that's a very good reference, actually. The fact that they had to bring people back in to provide that human element that's not going anywhere. People don't want a fully automated service, right? That's a really interesting point. Actually, we'll have to get you back on, because kind of the purpose of this podcast is not to be a technical surveying podcast, right? It's to talk about the bits around the technical side, which is absolutely fundamental and at the very center. But then there is the building relationships. There is the how do you leverage technology. There is the how do you turn, and clearly you've been very successful in this, how do you turn surveying and your technical knowledge into a business? So our
biggest investment next year is not going to be AI. We spent a lot of money on that, but it's actually going to be relationships and focusing on that. And if you look at what we'll spend on salaries and development into things like a referral portal and things like that, it'll far outstrip what we do in AI, because for us, relationships is the biggest most important factor that will safeguard us and help us grow. And I just think surveyors as a general, for whatever reason, and maybe it's just the way, to be interested in buildings and bricks and mortar in the first place, you're probably not as interested in relationships. But it's very hard to find good technical surveyors who are also great people and love building their own network and going out and meeting other people. And you don't, I spend a lot of time with lawyers and mortgage brokers and estate agents, and they're all out networking and building up their kind of their network. And it's something that I think most surveyors have turned a blind eye to. Maybe it's because of coming from the corporate surveying world, like a lot of us do, like myself, we're used to just having that iPad of jobs of 5, 6, 7 points a day.
There for you.
Yeah. But if you maintain that mentality, you are someone who will probably be replaced as a surveyor.
There are lots of success stories out there who do emphasize the importance of that. And you can see when it all comes together, they're turning away work at that point because they clearly crack that nut and offer an exemplary service. It's just one other point, actually, that you mentioned there in terms of, I suppose, talking about the shift, not away from technical by any means, because it is still fundamental, and understanding or having a real understanding of surveying is forever going to be critically important. But what are you preparing your staff for in terms of change and change in skill set? And you talked about investing in relationships being your biggest spend next year. Does that include training modules? Does that include a slight change in hiring profile? What are you focusing on to make sure that becomes a reality?
At the moment, we're kind of defining our one-way approach, which is essentially having a consistent approach to every single step of the process. And that's all about, for me, kind of smaller, intentional, thoughtful steps. So if even things like telling the vendor what you're doing, putting shoe covers on, we leave thank you cards, talk to the vendor, all these kind of touch points. So we're really systemizing that and putting that across there. We probably will have some kind of training around those softer skills. But yeah, ultimately, in terms of the DNA to become a Novello surveyor, technical knowledge is up there as probably one of the most important thing. But whereas before we might have just hired on qualifications and technical knowledge, it's now probably equally or probably more important that you are someone who's really personable, outgoing, is willing to go out and network, because I foresee a situation where surveyors probably have booked in their diary a drop-in at estate agents or a lunch or something. The role will become probably 60% surveying, 20% client liaison and advising them and being that human person, and 20% relationship building with referrers. So I think we're shifting for that, and our kind of DNA of the type of person that we hire has to track that. So we're already, and we have been for a few years, ultra focused on people who do that, but that's just going to become more and more so.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, James. That was a really interesting conversation. If you could kind of, I suppose, really summarize it into a soundbite. If you were, I suppose it's worth putting yourself back in the shoes of someone who perhaps isn't at a larger firm. What mentality would you adopt? What kind of message would you like to deliver people who are in the residential surveying space?
Yeah, I think it certainly wouldn't be to bury my head in the sand, which is, with some of the backlash comments I've seen, is certainly what some people are doing. Look, this technology is coming. It will be here sooner than you think, and it will be far better than you think. And it will result in some job losses for some people at some firms who use it as a volume term, as a volume technique. But that's not going to be us. And I feel a real responsibility to the industry to build something that is, going to revolutionize and make surveying better. But more so than that, rely on the human expertise and double down on that human interaction. So I think if I was a surveyor working for Novello or working for myself or working elsewhere, I would just be focusing so much of my time on those soft skills, that relationship, that network, developing that and becoming better and better, because that's really what's going to be the most valuable asset that you have going forward in the world.
And ultimately, all of this technology should enable more time to be able to focus on those things and ultimately deliver more value to the customer. Right? That's the intention. I think that's why these tools are being deployed.
I think the fear is not unfounded. I do think there will be places where the technology is used to replace skill sets and limit and cut down jobs. I think that's a necessity, but I think bigger than that, there'll be far more opportunities. And 20% of clients, depending on what stat you look at, have a survey. If we can create something that's really impressive and actually is perceived as valuable, and a client thinks, actually, I did it, get a lot of that. Most of the time I see online is clients saying, the report told me nothing, it was just caveats. If we can actually offer the world a far better experience and a better product, then that should result in more and more people using it. So hopefully that will result in growing and ever more demand for that human expert surveying advice. So that's what I hope comes from it. But we are in completely uncharted territory. So, who knows, who's to say what will happen?
Well, it's an exciting time. And as you said, technology is developing as rapidly every single day. So, yeah, I think being curious and not sticking your head in the sand is absolutely critical, and experimenting, right? And talking to people who have knowledge in the industry, be that you or other people who are experimenting with AI is going to be critical for staying relevant and staying up to date.
Yeah, and I think focus on quality, focus relationships, focus on finding what your customers want, and don't be someone who just focuses on volume and cheap fees, because you will be replaced.
Definitely. That's the real vulnerability in the market, if that's your speciality, certainly. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. That was a fascinating conversation. Appreciate you joining a lot.
Cheers. Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode or it gave you some food for thought, be sure to follow our show on your preferred podcast platform. To learn more about what we do at Go Report, visit goreport.com. The links are also in the bio. Until next time.